So there's been a while now since Apple and Google has shifted their whole focus from the physical hardware to the user interface, like Apple's Liquid Glass and Google's Material 3 Expressive. But why suddenly these companies have started focusing on the UI stuff? Let's talk about it. So Google spent last year doing something which they generally never does, which is listening to their users, like really listening to their users. And it turns out they have find out something which is very important. Like people usually recommends more UI designs which feels something like human, something like personal preference, not over to those flat designs which we are dealing with from last decade itself, from Google Pixel to Samsung S23 Ultra. On the other hand, Apple is likely to turn their whole UI stuff into those of liquid glass appearance, which is like completely focusing on real glass appearance on all texts and all parameters. Although they have now, taken a step back from a liquid glass to frosted glass. Now in this UI war, Google has been in the much more difficult situation than of Apple. Google designed one of the best UI in the world, from the Material 3 Expressive to every each and element of Android 16 that designs the best. But until and unless they don't have access to all of those environment which they belongs to, like if they have released Android 16, something like Samsung on the other hand will snap One UI 8 on top of it, and then OnePlus will do some other things on it, Realme will start doing some other things on it. On the other hand, Apple is sitting far behind in their seats and just like ordering their whole developer community that you have to design this UI until unless you don't want it to be on your iPhone. If you want it, just start designing. But Apple also is considering with one problem in those of liquid glass, which is readability. But it's like kind of solved in this of beta 4 update. Now in terms of Apple liquid glass, they are far in those limited area just because they have designed something new which has already been in whole of another level in terms of every individual machineries. Like if you start using virtual computing just like the Vision Pro, they have been designing those occupying thing that it feels real to their own users. Just like particularly in Vision Pro, it seems more likely to have those liquid glass appearance which they wanted in whole of their device. But they haven't understand the fact that these things cannot be perfectly exampled in those 2D spaces until unless you make them 3D, and in the phone case it's not quite a bit possible. And for context, Android is likely focusing to make their whole UI stuff for the two-dimensional objects just like our phones. So it feels more natural, more human and more personal, which is very good for today's era, but for the future, it might not be going well. So here's a question arise, which one is better? So if you ask me about now current scenario, I will likely to choose Google instead of Apple, just because Google's implementation in nowadays scenarios is very good, but Apple is likely to focus towards those future stuff. And definitely Google is optimizing for today, but Apple is likely to focus on tomorrow. Although Apple's initial implementation is always rough, but although they have done something new, it's always likely to be followed by some other companies as well. So there have been a whole of track record of Apple. Whatever they does, the first company started booing is Samsung and then others, and initially they started copying whole of Apple things in their own stuff. Just like when Apple has removed the 3.5mm jack from their phone, the first company who has removed those stuff after Apple is Samsung, and after that Pixel, Google. And initially when Apple launched their keyboard, especially for their phones, all the companies not acceptable, and after that they have adopted those same technology as Apple did. So it's having a whole of track record of companies following each other. So at the end, it isn't just the war of UI, but about serving their whole of business interests, including Apple and Samsung and Google as well. But it will be very interesting to see how the 5 years prior or how the future will be looking. Will it be more liquidy or will it be more materialistic? Hmm. Let me know what you think. Until that time, keep vibrating just like a quartz.